Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Chatter. This week, we're incredibly lucky to be joined by Des Rock, who is a neurodivergent leader and CEO of SIEMonster, who knows that having ADHD has been anything but a detriment to her career, and being able to see the world as a puzzle and manage the pieces has made her an exceptional leader. Des, welcome.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here, by the way.
Thanks for your time. I'm always super keen to understand the timelines before we get into the meat of the episode. So you were diagnosed quite recently?
Correct. About a year ago. Look, officially diagnosed. I think we all start the journey a little earlier than that, but I was adamant that I wasn't going to announce to anybody or accept it until I was officially diagnosed, because I didn't want to be accused of being on TikTok for too long and having a self-diagnosis. So I made sure that it was absolutely officially diagnosed. So officially a year ago. Suspicious about 2, yeah.
So when you got the diagnosis, you weren't shocked at all?
I was. Nobody around me was. So that's what happens. I was just like, oh my, can you believe this? And everybody around me said, yes. Which kind of sort of like, and then I was just like, what? How come no one else is shocked? And they're like, this makes so much sense. This really, and then I don't know what it was like for you, Alex, but for me, it was very much the case of, I told you I suspected, but having it in reality, and it was by the way, you know how it's like ADHD, it's like, do you have the hyperactive? Do you have the blah, blah, blah? I have everything. And so it wasn't even like, because in my mind, I was like, I'm sure I might tip the scales, right? And it turns out it's like, no, the full gamut. Here we are. So in that, I then had to say, hold on a minute. And so I think I went through the 7 stages of from acceptance all the way through to anger, bargaining, the whole bit to acceptance. I got there, and then I was and I remember being in the disappointment, the depression stage, like really, really sad for previous days, like everything that I'd gone through. But I'm now at acceptance, yeah.
Well, you said you had some suspicions for a couple of years before the assessment. What gave you those suspicions?
The clear one was that my children were diagnosed with ADHD, and one of them is diagnosed with ADHD and autism, by the way. So, so I said, oh, geez, that must have come from your father's side, like, just because no flies on me, right? So that's how that went down. And then that was the first seed about the fact that my daughter, who went down that rabbit hole of understanding diagnosis and all that sort of stuff, said, Mum, we think this is genetic, right? Like, this is showing to be genetic, hence not my issue, right? I'm sure it's your father's. And by the way, he's diverse as well. So, we're kind of a family of the Incredibles, right? All with powers. All of us, every single family member, it turns out. Very awesome. That was one tip off. The other one was that I was realizing that everybody who I was getting along with, and I don't know if you've had this too, also diverse, just always, you hang around those ones. They're the ones and they are openly, so there was a couple of people who were openly diagnosed and I was just getting along with them. And they were like, if you are vibing, there's a chance. And I said, oh, sure, I'm sure, like a carpenter, everything's a nail. That, again, refusing to accept anything, really. But they were the early signs where I thought, maybe I should look into this,
That's fascinating. And it's so true what you said about vibing with someone, and perhaps you sort of subconsciously pull around people that have similarities subconsciously.
Correct.
And I can feel that as well. When you just don't click with someone, or there's like this awkwardness in the air, which
for sure
just makes a friendship unsustainable. But when you find your people, and you maybe you're the same, do you look back on your friendships and the ones that have lasted?
We talked off air about the positives and negatives, and one of my negatives is my inability to maintain friendship with neuronormals, right? So because I didn't realize how weird I was or I was being. So yes, that is a real pain point for me. That has always been an issue for me. And now I know. Now I can see the behaviour, what I was doing, and all that sort of stuff. I don't know what. And I must preface by saying everyone's diversity always appears differently. We cannot compare diversity, symptoms, treatments, or anything like that. Everyone's is different. But for me, I tend to cut the small talk and go straight to the meat of it, right? So I will go right into the crux, you know what I mean? I'll get to know you, Alex, and then I'll be like, so tell me about your childhood trauma. and you know, and we'll bond. And then none of that will be too much information for either of us, and we will park it. There will not be a residual thing about this is, you know, that what had happened in that. However, neurobeige people will be like, that was too weird for me. That's just not the way not the level I want to operate on. So that, you know, that was a giveaway. That was a definitely giveaway.
Maintaining friendships has been a recurring topic on this podcast, and you're the first guest who's managed to articulate it in that way, and I think it's so true. It's hard to maintain friendships with the people that you don't vibe with, or perhaps aren't in the same neuro-beige, as you put it, which is a phrase I love.
I mean, it doesn't make it, the neuro-beige. It doesn't make it necessarily completely smooth with other neurodiverse people, by the way, because they can clash. You know, with rejection sensitivity in both of us, we could be in a hellhole real quick. You know, something I didn't say or said, and then you perceive it as, it just could escalate really well. But at least we have a chance because we understand. We totally understand. A neurobeige will walk in and I'm going to stop myself there, because I actually find that they've had unbelievably great marketing, because some of their behaviour I find really absurd, yet they're the ones who are considered normal, right? You know, so for example, you know, they need a lot more emotional coaxing and emotional hand-holding for every single situation. Right. So you cannot just ask a question. It cannot be just a normal exchange based on the fact that we're already friends, based on the fact that all of the history, every interaction has to start with, hi, how you doing? How's everyone? All of the soft padding before you can get to the question. And yet they're the normal ones, because you can't just say, hey, I really need this, because that comes across as, well, that's really brash. Gosh, didn't even ask me for the time. It's not like I just met you, by the way. We've known each other for years and years, presumably. The way they communicate, and see, everything I'm referring to here is the decoding and the masking that we do, because we all pretend we all know how to do this, which makes us incredibly intuitive, because we've learned from a very, very young age, and I'm sure you've done this too, how to read signs, how to read people, how to know what's expected of you, how to answer what's expected of you. So when you walk in a room, you've got to say, hi, everybody, how's it going? Or even though it doesn't come naturally nearly, or when you're leaving, to say goodbye to everybody, all that sort of stuff, because that was a big one for me. I was always accused of just leaving, but apparently that's hyper rude, right? You have to say, hi, bye, everybody. Okay, I'm about to leave now. Okay, bye, everybody, bye, bye, bye. So that was a big one. And I remember being picked up by a friend's parents as I was leaving their parents' house. And I sat there and I thought, I just visited the friend. Never occurred to me to have to say bye to everybody, all the other family members as I leave, right? Things like that. Yeah, so those are the things that I guess, have been quite different and unusual, but those are the things that are telltale signs, and it is literally us communicating in a way that makes a lot of sense to us, whereas they need a lot. I find neuronormals more emotional. I really do.
What do you think it is that you mentioned that when neurodivergent people and neurobeige meet each other, they can go straight in with the heavy stuff, just bypass the small talk, which, by the way, I completely relate to. And the amount of parties I've left and entered without the small talk. All right, I'm not saying goodbye, I'm just going. But I might have probably trauma dumped.
Yes, everyone else is like, what the hell just happened here, right? And probably behind your back, and this is the saddest thing, we don't know the impact we've had, but behind your back, what's being discussed is, oh my God, she's too much, she's weird, all of this stuff. If you're resonating with any of that, this is what the expectations are put on us to conform, to mask continuously, and all of that creates such pressure, because we have to constantly think about the way we interact with the people, the world around us, whereas they do not. So, leaning on to how can they accommodate us, they never have to think about that. So that's what we call, that's a level of privilege right there. They never have to think about the way they're impacting us as well. Have you noticed that? How it's weighted for them? Like, we have to worry about how we're impacting everybody.
because you can, because going back to the example of just leaving a party, like that feels natural to me to just go without saying goodbye. But actually then I can get home and I can get quite anxious about how I might have been perceived.
Yes.
Did I offend someone?
Yes, exactly.
Was I rude in that situation because I didn't
Yeah.
say goodbye, which is expected in a social situation. But to me, it doesn't come naturally. So that plays on my mind then for days or weeks, and it makes me anxious.
Absolutely. And what's worse is then we get this unfair thing of like anyone who's diverse, anyone who's got, because by the way, and I keep saying this, diversity is coming to a buffet table with an empty platter and putting whatever you want on that platter, and you could have all of these symptoms that work, do and don't work for you, and society at the minute has labelled us as ADHD and other people as like autism or bipolar or dyslexia. All of these are variations of diversity. Just there is no such thing as pigeonholing and one person's ADHD is everybody's ADHD. It is, just imagine a buffet table of neurodiversity and you've just gone up there and put however much of the serving of whatever. So there might be things that cross intersect as well, right? And that's why we don't compare diagnoses, and that's why we don't compare how we deal with our diagnoses, like all that sort of stuff. How do we treat? How do we manage our? And I really take umbrage to the fact that we need to manage, but that's the world we live in, right? So that's where we're at. So for you, having to say now sit there and worry about have you offended everybody and has that now causing you anxiety about that? No one's because you're being taught that's the normal. You're constantly being told over and over again, that's the normal, conform. So getting back to, if you don't, these diverse people, it's almost like they don't have feelings. And I can't think of anything more, can I swear, Alex?
Yeah, go for it, yeah.
I can't think of anything more bullshit than that, right? The fact that we don't care, we do. The reason why we do adapt, the reason why we do mask is because we do care. Not just about us fitting in, but about how we're perceived by the other person. That's exactly the issue that you're talking about right now, right? It's just that, and I can counteract by saying we do not put as much weight onto that emotional fluff that they require in order to listen to the messages and listen to the communications.
Do you think there's a consequence, though, of unmasking or refusing to mask, refusing to not be yourself and to...
It depends... Okay, you know what the answer is? It depends on how much money you've got. Because one man's crazy is another man's eccentric, right? Do you know what I'm saying? So if you think of the most genius people in this world, the most successful in history. I want to go in history. So not even, Elon's clearly, he is one of us. There's no doubt about that. But let's even go to like Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, anyone, right? I'm trying to think of women to balance this out too. Anyone of history who's been notably different, notably stood out, I'm going to argue with you that they were one of us, okay? Because they were thinking differently. Because you could see, just take a look at a picture of Einstein. Yeah, he's one of us, you can tell, right? So, yeah. But it all depends on where you are and how you can perceive and what you can get away with as well, right? Again, the difference between eccentric and crazy is money. Is money, right? So we can unmask. So, if, the average person, if they wanted to unmask and kind of like do their own thing, again, it comes to the currency in which the neurobeige value. And they value that stuff. So if you had money and prestige and notoriety, your currency in this society goes up, and they will put up in air quotes, with your behavior a lot more than somebody who doesn't have those currencies but has the same behavior.
Yeah, so if Elon Musk left a party without saying goodbye, no one would see it as a problem. But if a low status person did the same, then that would be considered rude.
Yes.
And people would make small talk about that afterwards, saying, "Oh,
correct."
He just left
But
without
you know
saying
what
goodbye.
you know what they do? They would reframe it with Elon and say, "He's so cool. He can do whatever the hell he likes." Yeah. Yeah.
But do you think there's a consequence of being yourself, leaving a party without saying goodbye, which is, I'm trying to do more now, but I also am aware that when I do that, there is a consequence to me. I do feel anxious and I feel like I've been rude. By saying goodbye, it's not an effort for me, even though it feels forced and it's not a natural thing for me to do. But I know that also I have to do little things to conform and to not intentionally be viewed in a negative way to other people, even if that means not entirely being my true self in that moment.
True. And by the way, that is a universal rule, no matter what your diversity status is. We all do things in order to participate in society. That doesn't make you, you know what I mean? We all do. We all follow an invisible set of rules. We all do. That's got nothing to do with, so these are the ones that are added on. So we all know that this is the social standards, and come on, you're English, right? So all people know about politeness and all about and diplomacy and all that sort of stuff. You guys are the masters at that, right? I'm Australian. We're a bunch of, so it's different. Anyway, but however, you will find, the wise people once said, find your tribe and love them hard. You will find that in order to have respite or whatever you want to call it, find your tribe and love them hard. It is exhausting to live in a world where you are surrounded by people who don't understand you and you're constantly having to be on best behavior. And if that is who you are, then absolutely, let me give it to you in ways that we can understand. It's a balancing scale. You cannot never, ever mask. I don't think you can get away with that, right? Because even neuronormals do stuff that they don't want to do in order to get through life. So that's a universal one. However, if you're constantly, if one is outweighing the other, it's way too exhausting. I would highly recommend that the people who you hold near and dear, and by the other thing, we have an issue with boundaries as well. We have an issue with personal boundaries, spaces, and understanding who should and who should not be in our boundaries and how we should act. So this is how I've learned it and how I'm teaching it to my children as well. You've got to think of it like a target with a bullseye, right? So circles with bigger circles on the outside and all that sort of stuff. This is the image we say. We tend to treat everyone as either in or out. We're either going to bond with you or not. And we need to learn that we can't do that. So there are layers. So there is an acquaintance layer, there is a friendly layer, and it goes on and on and on till we get to the intimate layer right here. And these are the people we need to know where they're at. That's number one. Number two is people can move from one layer to another. So people can go, okay, this is no longer working for me. I need to move them from the intimate layer to the friendship layer or the acquaintance layer. And that's totally okay because we're very good at cutting people off black and white style, right? So to recategorize them in our head to say that's where they're at. This is where they're at. And if it means that we can't control ourselves by not being ourselves, then we limit ourselves in other ways, like the time we spend, the amount of things we do together and all that sort of stuff, right? So my suggestion is that this is a rule for everybody, by the way. Hang around people who love you and who you love. That's an easy one. And know that, where your boundaries are. Know when they're being violated and know how to deal with that, like how to take somebody from one category to another as well.
I would call category one, another way of saying it, my inner circle.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes.
I've met, I'm sure you're like anyone, hundreds of thousands of people in my lifetime, and I've probably got 3 people in my inner circle that I feel comfortable around, I completely feel at ease around. And I've moved one of them, I won't say any names, from an acquaintance into that inner circle. And that took time. And I don't know if that was because when I first met him, he wasn't being his true self. But over time, he read that I was perhaps similar. And so over time, he was able to fall into his true self around me. And then suddenly I picked up on that as well. And he fell into my inner circle. Okay. So going on that theory that you said that people can move from one category to the other, that's an example that I can think of where I think he was probably masking when I met him. So I didn't feel comfortable enough to say I can feel comfortable around him. But over time, I imagine his mask started to slip and I picked up on that. We both started to feel really comfortable together. And now he's one of the 3 people that I would share anything with. And I feel like I can be my true self. I could just be, because my true self is like a lot of the time resting bitch face. And, I can come home when my jaw's aching and my cheeks are hurting because I've been having to sort of fake smile and fake expression all day, then it hurts. But around these 3 people, I don't need to, and of course we laugh together, but I don't need to fake expression, which is what I do feel like I need to do on a day-to-day basis when I'm just out in the world.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is you're never going to get away with not ever having to fake it or that, whatever. But what I'm saying is your time is precious. Your time is absolutely precious. Make sure you spend it with the people who deserve it. And that is a golden rule anyway. So the times where you have to, be courteous and be, polite society and move on and do, because we're networking, we're working, we know we have to deal with everybody. So if that's too much of your time and you're exhausted, then just scale it back. Like I said, make sure that you are spending more time with the people who love and get you.
I totally agree. It's been fascinating to look back. And do you think you've looked back since you've had
Yes.
the diagnosis and this last, so you've been diagnosed and then you've suspected for 2 years. Do you
Yes.
look back in your life and
Yes.
see and say, okay, that happened
So
because
much.
of this?
So much. And it varies from embarrassing to funny to cringing, just there are some parts where I'm just cringing about the stuff that's happened and I wish I had have known things would have made a lot more sense. And by the way, that's a very, very normal thing. That post-process where you start, like looking over your life, and then you start to mourn all of that. Oh man, I had no idea. Because everything's making sense now. Everything is making sense. And that's a very normal thing to have happen, and very normal to have those emotions. And it's incredibly difficult to forgive yourself as well for things you didn't know when you didn't know. And by the way, diversity's got nothing to do with intelligence either, it doesn't mean that we're not, nothing to do with that. Our brains are wired differently, and we have a dopamine, to do with dopamine deficiency and all that sort of stuff. And I will argue that we've always been here. We're the X-Men that walk among you. We've always been here. And in society, in history, without us, there wouldn't have been the mind revolutions that we've had. When the proverbial hits the fan, it is you and me who know what to do, who are in the driver's seat, and we know what to do, right? Because we can think fast, we can, adapt really quickly, and we can see everything that's going on. When we're in a process of like industrialized world where everything's, we struggle. We absolutely struggle. But let me ask you this: when the pandemic happened, did you panic?
No, and to the point where people were commenting, saying how I was able to be so calm and not just
Correct.
fall in line and be panicked like everyone else.
Right.
To the point where it got me into arguments with people.
Yes.
How
So
can you
you're
be so
not
calm,
alone.
Alex?
You're not alone. Every diverse person I've asked this question to, it was go time for us. It was absolutely go. While everyone was like, what do we do? What do we do? School? Oh my, what do we do? We're like, our brain, because all of a sudden we have so much to think about, so much to solve. The dopamine hit was amazing, right? So we were just like this. That's when, so you think, this is when they need us.
All of those traits that you just listed, they sound like the perfect mix of requirements that an entrepreneur would thrive
Right.
with, and that would create the mix of a successful
Which is
entrepreneur.
why, exactly, especially, look, there is a high volume of CEOs who are diverse. That's a fact. There is a higher volume of people in IT industry, even higher. The diversity in my industry is off the charts, right? So, and there's clear patterns and reasons for that. But getting back to being an entrepreneur or a CEO or anything like that, I'm exactly where I need to be. There, in my job, where everyone would be stressed about and handle, being able to handle stress. For me, this is like a wonderful challenge every day is what my brain needs as well. Because if it was a process conveyor belt, I wouldn't be able to, you know that. Like we would be there would be no challenge. There's nothing in it for us. We constantly need that challenge. There's nothing says that like a founder or a CEO or an entrepreneur who wakes up every day and wonders what's going to hit them in the face today, because that's how it's like. That's what it's like, right? And so it is it's a perfect mix of that. So when you have that, you can see that that's where we shine best. And the other reason is why is because by that stage you now have other people to support the other parts of you as well. So, the follow through, the bits that we're not too, we can have assistants to help with that. We can have other project people who are really good with that. So we'll solve the problem and then delegate for somebody else to complete that. That's why it's a perfect role for us as well.
I create the analogy of sort of trying to leave the shore and trying to get over that first wave. And once you get over that first wave, which is really hard, then you might come into a bit of money, and then suddenly you've got the resources to and the privilege to, as you said, hire an assistant or hire a cleaner. But it's getting over that first wave as an entrepreneur where you are on your own. You don't have any help. And I say financially, but I appreciate that help comes in friends and family, but just keeping it in financial terms, like there's a lot of people listening who have that entrepreneurial streak, who are trying and struggling getting over that first wave because they're really, really good at some things, but they perhaps lack the ability to thrive in other areas.
Absolutely right, because it's a privilege to have the support and all that sort of stuff. Even with the friends, it's a privilege to have that too. Not everyone has that as a network as well. So I completely agree with that statement. And this is universal, so this is leaving the topic of diversity aside. The one thing that holds us back in life is what's between our ears. So we hold ourselves back and limit ourselves in what we do as well. And with self-doubt, with shame, with all of these things that affects us on what type of leader we are, what type of person we are. And I don't mean just in business. You're focusing on business. This could be, I'm having trouble with my personal life. I'm having trouble with my financial life. I'm having trouble with anything. The one thing that holds us back is how we value ourselves. Again, universal on that point. We just happen to cop a lot more of the shame because the society is tilted to the point where we're the ones who have to conform. As I mentioned before, the pressure is not on them to accommodate for us. It's for us to accommodate for them. So that's when I see people and say, they ask, so what should I do to improve my leadership? By the way, leadership, and if you're only measuring it in how much money you've made and what type of a business you've run, and you're excluding your leadership within your family and you're excluding leadership within your friends and all that sort of stuff, then I question what type of leadership you are really, really meaning there. But what I see constantly is that the person themselves is what's holding themselves back, and in order to move forward with the success. So getting back to what you're saying, it's like, how does someone who's worked all of that out but doesn't have the support networks to get through? Look, the truth is, this. It's really hard. It's really hard, to get there on your own and to do it on your own. Yes, there are people who can do it. Of course they are. It would be awful to compare yourself to the handful that have done it and then beat yourself that you can't, right? So that doesn't help either. So it's not impossible, but I don't think you're abnormal if you're struggling either,
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think getting over that first wave, to go back to that analogy with ADHD, when you are very good at some things but perhaps struggle in others, is incredibly hard. And unless there's some luck involved and you're working in an industry where you just need the skills that you have in order to perhaps get that first break, which gives you access to resources that will fill those voids and help you with the bits that you don't struggle with. But the shame's super interesting. And I agree that it's not just professional, it is in relationships. We know that ADHD can present challenges in romantic relationships and financially with impulse spending and all that kind of stuff. But it all comes back to the shame that can ensue as a result of all of the above.
Which is why I focus in on that. You know what I mean? When we're talking about how do we deal with this, the very first thing we should be dealing with is role model. Like, we need more representation, period. We need more representation of people who have diversity standing up and saying me too. We have a lot of people hiding because they have to, because they feel that their job's in jeopardy, or they feel that they can't step forward. So the fact that you and I are stepping forward and saying that, look, I have a lot of people who will water down autism to call it Asperger's when that's no longer a thing. That is now, do you know what I mean? Because as autism creates such you think we've got it bad. Autism is such a stigma, absolute stigma. And I definitely... I think all, as I said to you with the buffet table, I think all diversity is diversity, right? So there's no anything. We've just got different levels of whatever we have and how we manage that, by the way. So can you imagine the world if we had more successful people standing up saying, yeah, I've got autism too, and I've got autism too, and it will take away that sting, for starters, because right now there's a lot of people, and it might be a generational thing too, but right now there's a lot of people who are very very afraid to come out and say that, or will water it down. Or even, you know what's even worse? They'll even say about their child, yeah, he's a bit aspy. Like, talk about minimizing something, right? Talk about implementing, talk about, that is secondhand shame, by the way. And the child who's listening to that knows, we're very intuitive, we know that this is something we need to hide. This is something we need to minimize. Very early on, we're taught about that. So if we need to move forward with, accepting diversity and understanding diversity, we really, really need to tackle shame.
I agree. It helps massively when people like us and many others come forward and are open about it. And I'm very careful when I speak about my ADHD, that I genuinely think that it has played a huge part in my professional journey, but I'm also aware that the traits of ADHD and the impulsivity have hindered me in other areas.
Yes.
Perhaps why I drink too much sometimes, why that relationship didn't work out, and other areas. So I'm very, very careful that I don't label it as a superpower, and I create a balanced narrative around how it's helped me and how it's hindered me. So I suppose my question is, especially that ADHD has had a lot of exposure on social media and with people coming forward. It seems to be a new celebrity every week, which I think is good, coming forward. But some of them are going a bit too far, I think, and coming out, wearing a cape and saying it's their superhero. So what do you think of the superpower narrative around ADHD?
I think it can be. I think you hit it on the head when you say it can be toxic if we're only showing that, because if you are not shining, if you are paralyzed with your ADHD, because we all know, you just hit the nail on the head, right? So we all know there are days where showering can be hard, getting out of bed can be hard, talking to somebody can be hard. And by the way, you're not alone. We all have all of that stuff, right? And we all know what that's like. And yet here I am. Look, I remember when my GP asked me, when I asked for the referral, and I said, and he says, Des, do you consider yourself a successful person? That was his measuring stick of whether I had ADHD or not, And so, yeah, I think the 20-year-old me would have answered quite differently than the way I answered to him on that question there. But I think, as we all come out, there's always a sense of celebration, pride. People are going to represent it in different ways. I think the more, the better. I think we need to, because here you and I are talking about the dark side. Why do we just want to focus on the dark side? Does that help our cause? Should we not talk about the positive side too? Because that's there too. I think we should talk about it all, right? I think we should totally talk about it all. Glamorizing it, I'm not for. Making it a two-dimensional thing, I'm not for. Being authentic about it, I'm totally for. I think that when we're starting to redefine and introduce diversity to the world, it's going to take all forms. We definitely need to show, here you and I are talking about the dark side and we're addressing that. And it's totally okay for people to show the good side as well, the positives as well, because we need role models of all sides. I do object to showing it as a two-dimensional or one-dimensional thing, because it's not. And but I understand, I think the more people talking about it, the better. I do object to, and one particular narrative taking over. For example, just as you're saying, the people wearing capes, come on, you're only... Imagine if all we were talking about is the negative. That would also be equally bad, right? So it's because it's not. It's the way we think. We think differently. We're Apple computers. So we think differently. We think differently, right? And so, of course, we're going to think differently. That's very positive. And of course, we're going to think differently. That's very negative as well, impacting. Duh. That makes a lot of sense. So the message, I don't want anyone to focus in on just one side of that, by the way. I would like a far more authentic and rounded out discussion and representation.
Totally agree. And I speak about the positives a lot. I've made a lot of videos on TikTok and Instagram talking about how I think ADHD has impacted in a positive way my career with the creative thinking and the pattern recognition and the problem-solving skills and being able to remain calm in a crisis, like you alluded to for the pandemic. And especially in the workplace, I think there's a load of benefits. Diversity of thought and diversity of mind is always going to benefit a company. And how is that something you've experienced in your business?
Well, as I alluded to before, my company and my industry is rife with diversity anyway. I don't need to maybe we should open up to diverse hire. Like, no, we're good. We need to look for the normals, to balance us out. They might be the token in my industry. So it's a little bit different to ask me, right? Anybody who's developing software the way I am, right? It's quite a different thing to ask me. But I also look. I can speak to what it brings, and it brings awesomeness because I have people who will hyper focus on something, and you need that. You need someone to really take on a task and hyper focus like no one's business, and that's brilliant. But I also have people who are just like cannot follow through sometimes, or they will keep it to themselves and not communicate. All of the bad bits too that you have to manage as well through that. So, but I'm going to broaden that and say it doesn't really matter if the staff that you have is diverse or not. Those challenges present themselves no matter what. As a good leader, you need to understand your staff in order to lead them in the best possible way. It should not matter once you understand how to lead properly. It should not matter if they're diverse or not. Your objection is to make sure that they are safe enough and are in a place enough to do their work well, right? That's your goal. Remember, people think, if we were to define leadership, people think leadership is telling people what to do, do this. And that is definitely a part of leadership, for sure. But the bigger part of leadership is caring about the people you're leading. And by the way, that's not just in work. Think of any organisation. Politics. Don't you want they should be caring about the people they're leading. In religion, they should be caring about the people they're leading. In family, they should absolutely be caring about the people they're leading. Right? So once you are caring about the people you're leading and ensuring that they're okay to do their jobs, that's your job, right? Then it doesn't matter what type of person is in front of you, because it's your job to understand them, care about them, and make sure that they can do their job well.
Do you think leadership is also creating a safe space for your employees and your team to be able to open up and to ask for help and ask for accommodations, more importantly?
Absolutely. Yes, because again, leadership isn't about telling people what to do. It is about caring about the people you lead. Look, shame doesn't motivate. Anger doesn't motivate. Remember, let's be results driven. You want the best performance out of your staff. None of those things motivate, What motivates people is feeling like loyalty motivates. Loyalty really motivates. In order to reach into people and motivate them, with loyalty, you need to connect with them. You need to understand them, right? To win hearts and minds. Yeah.
I think as a byproduct of not creating that safe space is you can end up having a lot of employees who are perhaps in the office, sat at a desk, and their neurodiversity, whether they know it or not. I mean, I think 15 to 20% of people have a neurodivergent condition.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of people in most businesses that are neurodivergent. And if it's not accommodated, then there's going to be a lot of wasted productivity as a result of anxiety.
Yes.
That person perhaps sat at a desk feeling anxious, and that anxiety is causing them almost paralysis of thought because they can't think in a way that's going to enable them to do the job that they're capable of doing. They're just not capable of doing it in that environment because for whatever reason it's too noisy or it's too bright or there's too much going on. So, and I know that there's a lot of people listening who are in that situation and they are questioning whether or not that they should ask for help or disclose their condition to their employer because, and there's a number of reasons why somebody wouldn't want to disclose, because of the stigma, like you said earlier, and because of perhaps discrimination if they say that they have ADHD or autism or another neurodivergent condition. So my question is, to those people listening, as a leader yourself, what advice would you give to somebody in that position? Look,
I'm not going to give you fairy answers. I think financial security is paramount. It is the bottom of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So I would never ask anybody to put themselves in a position where they would be financially compromised and lose their job, period. And the second rule is, when in doubt, there is no doubt. So if you're afraid that your disclosure will discriminate against you, chances are that it will, right? Because if you were going to feel, remember, we're very perceptive souls. We're very perceptive souls. We already know the gauging of what would happen. That's why we know it. We don't know. No one has to tell us when to put the mask up. It's so automatic. We know. So if you're feeling like, should I just come out and say this? And your gut is saying, your intuition is telling you, that's because that environment has never made it safe for you. If they were proactive and saying, we're going to be proactive about this, they should make the first step in allowing for that. So I'm not sure if I would encourage people to put themselves in a risk where they would financially lose, and listen, not every industry is the same too. As I mentioned to you off air, I had some people message me after hearing what I had to say another time and saying they could never come out because in their industry, what they do, it's a death knock. There's just no way in hell. Reminds me of like being gay, right? So being, coming out like that. It's the same thing. How can you possibly tell people? It's up to them on what they want to do with that, and they're the ones best to manage that, or whether they want to come out or not, or whatever, they feel safe in that environment, in that industry, and all that sort of stuff. It's very, very similar to that. And I'm telling you, there are some people out there who just won't. They'll take that stuff to their grave because their career that they have built has meant a lot to them. For me, in IT, in a lineup, it is pick the normal, really, right? So it's quite easy for me. Right? But not every industry can afford to say that, so how can I possibly give advice out that would work in every industry? I think you need to trust what you do best for you. The one thing that you and I can do, Alex, is to push the needle forward, is that talk about it, make it more accessible to everybody as possible, make it more normalized, make everything more normalized. So it's a bigger, wider discussion rather than leaving it on to the people who are afraid, who are paralyzed with fear, for them to move the needle. It should be us. It really should be us.
No, I agree totally. It's for people like you and me. And I think you did give really good advice then. It was that there are a lot of people who might go on TikTok or Instagram and almost get a bit of toxic positivity, because there's a huge movement around openly disclosing it now and saying, oh, you have to disclose at work. Your boss is legally obliged to make accommodations. If they don't, then you can sue them and all this kind of. But in reality, it's not as straightforward as that. In reality, There's a lot of anxiety attached, shame. And as you said, the key thing is to trust your intuition. You know if your workplace is safe.
Right.
And you probably already know, based on your intuition and your ability to see and read the room, how they're going to react if you say that you have a neurodivergent condition and you require accommodations in order to work in a better way.
Correct.
And that really is the fundamentals of the advice that you just gave. And I think that is so important. Trust your intuition,
absolutely,
because otherwise you're going to put yourself in a very vulnerable position.
Yes. And I don't want that. And so the people, it is up to us. The obligation is up to us to move the needle, not onto the people who are already compromised, who are already victimized, and do you know what I mean? Or already vulnerable. You and I, right? So no, I'm not going to be able to lose my job. I am the founder of my job. I can't lose my job. I'm happy to stand up for everybody else who can't. That's the obligation that I've taken on. That's why, by the way, I come on here and talk about this, because this does nothing for my career, by the way, right? But what it does, and I don't care about that, what it does do is it moves the needle for my children. Do you understand? Like, I'm here for them and anybody else, but for them. Because damned if I'm going to be in a world, not on my watch, am I going to be in a world where I'm going to add to the shame and the toxicity of this. I will stand up and say, yep, I'm diverse. Absolutely I am. Because I'm not allowing it on my watch. So I can afford to do it, is what I'm saying. You can afford to do it.
We can afford to do it because we are in that privileged position where we've got over that first wave that we were talking about earlier. And if someone says, oh, we don't believe that your ADHD is real, or we think you're a liability now, it doesn't affect us because we're over that first wave. But hearing people like yourself talk about this will make someone else feel seen, so it will validate someone else's experience, and it perhaps give them the confidence to speak out. Or if even a business owner, they could listen to this, and that could be what it takes for them to recognize that they need to make it clear that their arms are open to hearing about neurodiversity, and that might make them bring in a neurodivergent speaker, or that might make them send out an email saying, we understand neurodiversity, and if there's anyone who needs an accommodation, you can reply in a confidential way and we will have a chat about it.
Correct. And also, my motivations are not to gain popularity on a social media platform and become an influencer on this topic as well. And that speaks to what you said about a lot of people jumping on that bandwagon to ride that wave and create that toxic positivity that's going on. All of a sudden, you know that, and all of a sudden, every trait possible is now an ADHD symptom. You know those ones? I've seen them too, right? Like it's getting out of hand. So I'm not that. I have no interest in gathering a following on this topic at all. It's not my core industry. It's nothing there. I've got nothing to gain out of being here and talking about this except what I've said. Except I'm standing in. I truly, truly believe it is up to me with nothing. I'm not making money out of this, so there's nothing except for me to stand up and say, yeah, I'm diverse as well. Yep. And we need more of these stories. We need more people to stand up and say it.
If there are other leaders listening, and I know there will be many, who understand and recognize what neurodiversity is, and they know that they've probably got neurodiversity within their business, but they just don't know where to start. What advice would you give to other leaders who want to make steps to show that their employees, that their arms are open to learning?
Right. First of all, I'd appeal to their greed, right? The more you cater for diversity, the more stronger your team is going to be and the more productivity you're going to get. Bottom line. That's the bottom line, to be honest, because you talked about, the anxiety of coming into a workplace where there's overwhelming, environment, all that sort of stuff. And if your person works much better, and I have staff who work infinitely better from home, there is no way on hell I'm going to have them come into an environment where they are compromised and they're giving me 50% now. No way. Why would I do that? So again, I'm going to appeal to greed, right? We're talking about money, right? I'm going to appeal to greed. You want the best out of your workers? Do you want the best productivity out of your workers? I'm telling you, cater to their needs, you'll get more. It goes back to what I said, loyalty breeds productivity. Simple as that. Once you've understood that, so how do you go about doing that? And it really, every industry is different. I can talk about mine, of course, where I do, like remote staff is a thing. If you don't want to appear on camera in any meeting, not a requirement in my company at all. I don't care what you look like. I don't care how you dress every day. None of that matters to me. Performance matters, right? It does take away a lot of the anxiety-inducing things for a diverse person, right? So because I weigh that, I don't care. Especially if you're in tech, who cares what you? Nobody. What matters to me is your output. What matters to me? Are you happy? All of that matters to me. So in my industry, I can talk about that. I cannot talk to other industries and what they're like. I'm not in that. I can't advise on that. But I also know one thing, that if you allow people, first of all, if you are a leader and you have people under you, guarantee you they've got people, they're diverse, you just don't know about it, right? Secondly, if you want to increase productivity, or you're wondering, why is this person being so difficult? It may be that they are masking. It may be that they're struggling with something. And rather than just turfing them, improving the conditions in which they're working, and it could be really small things, by the way, could increase the productivity and the corporate culture as well. Because, what we touched on before, diversity, like the fact that everyone thinking differently is going to further you. That's a very proven thing, by the way, that the more ideas in the room, the better, the stronger you'll be.
Judge people on their outcomes, not their process.
Yeah. The way to blanket it and just say, look, is there anything that you could do? If you had is there anything that you could do that would help you in increasing your productivity? Ask your staff. Ask. Because if you heard that, and you knew that you didn't want to come in or you wanted to, you'd say it. You'd say, I would be more productive if I did X, Y, Z. Ask your staff. What would help them?
You don't even have to mention neurodiversity, perhaps.
Exactly right.
Just give someone the option to ask for help without
just say
what into a exactly condition.
Right. It's kind of like talking about the condition without. It's just like, what would help increase productivity for you?
Also, I think it's really important. I saw a statistic that 80% of neurodivergent employees, if there's not accommodations put into place, leave a job within the first 6 months. So if you appealing to that greed and that bottom line, the cost of rehiring someone.
Exactly right.
Because of that, just that sieve effect of your staff not being happy, sitting there, not knowing what to do, not knowing how to ask for help, and leaving, not being fired, leaving by their own will. Yes. And then the cost of rehiring to the business. So again, it goes back to that. Yeah.
So that's why I appeal to the greed. Because if I say, make the world a better place, no one cares, Alex. No one. it's not going to hit and resonate as much as you're running a business. You want to be as profitable as you can be. The way to do that is to motivate your staff. How do you motivate your staff? You make sure that they are looked after, period. Ask them what you can do to help them do their job better.
Totally agree. I'm trying to think if there's anything else before we wrap up. Do you think there's anything else you wanted to talk about?
Look, I always like to end by telling people who are out there, because a lot of people who listening to this, they're collecting stories. And they're collecting your story and my story and everybody else's story. And the reason why we do that is because we're trying to understand where we sit in the world. Are we okay? Are we normal? How much do I have to do? And the only thing I want to tell you is that you are perfect the way you are, right? So everything about you is exactly the way it should be. The world needs all of us. What we all bring, we're needed. Do you know what I'm saying? If you're very, very good at one thing, fantastic, bring that to the table. If you're not good at another, there's other people who can fill that in for you. The value of every human is just as equal as everybody else's. It doesn't matter. So that's the message I want to leave on, is that you're not less at all. You think differently, but you're not less.
And if you're the type of person who leaves a party without saying goodbye, you might just be because you think differently as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, like I said, find your tribe, love them hard, leave without saying goodbye.
Love that. Des, thank you so much. Where can people find you if they want to hear more?
Certainly. I'm on LinkedIn if you want to follow me professionally there under Des Rock, DEZ, ROCK. I feel like I have to spell the last one too because I get caught up on that one. But just on the, I love saying this, on the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, because I'm a Prince fan, so that's a connection there. And my handle is Destraction, DEZ Traction, which is a dead giveaway, by the way.
Amazing. And you can tap the wall behind you 3 times and go into Diagon Alley after this.
That's where I'm heading next, yeah.
Lovely. Des, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.